Welcome back to the Pushing Through Loss podcast, where we share stories, honor resilience, and embrace strength. I am Kalila Green Siciliano, and it is my honor to begin the journey with you. I am so thrilled to be welcoming Danielle to the podcast today. We were just talking for a few minutes beforehand, and the idea that you're coming on with this level of expertise in working with other people in therapy and coaching and being able to really get people to work through their emotions is such a beautiful aspect to the loss journey. And I'm so thrilled that you found me. So welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here.
Let's start, I guess, with the beginning in terms of how you got into coaching and how you got into working with other people in the field that you're in.
That's a great question. I love talking about this story. I wish that I had found a way to boil it down to something like really succinct myself. But 3 days ago, I was on another podcast, and the host of that podcast actually did that for me. She introduced me and she said, Coach or chiropractor turned coach. And I was like, whoa.
All of a sudden it made sense.
Great. Yeah, because I often introduce myself, or just locally, people know me and they know that I'm a chiropractor, and they ask, well, where's your office? And I'm like, well, I work at home, and I've been working at home since 2015. And they're like, so you see patients at home? I'm like, well, I used to, but I don't anymore. And I have never found a really short way to say, well, I went to chiropractic school and I found chiropractic business to be really challenging after I had my kids, and work-life balance sucked. There wasn't any.
I can
And
imagine.
also, when I had my second child, I just knew intuitively, very quickly, and very suddenly, it was time for me to walk away from my practice. I sold it, and just a few months later, I was like, okay, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? I still had all of my student loan debt from chiropractic school and really wanted to be an entrepreneur still. I wanted to make a bigger impact. I wanted to help more people, but I didn't want to do that at the expense of missing out on time with my kids. Essentially, they were just like 4 and 1 at this time. And I discovered a course that I took online. I had never done something like that before. It was 2014 or 15. So that was brand new. And I thought, well, I'm going to sign up for this thing. It's really expensive. It was like $2,000. And I don't know what this is going to do, but I just feel like I'm really called. So I took the course and I learned about online business. And I thought, whoa, if I had had access to this information before I started my own brick and mortar business, I could have applied a lot of this and things would have gone a lot differently. So
Interesting.
I kind of just took the next couple of years to like explore what am I going to do with my career. And then in 2016, I launched a brand essentially for female chiropractors. There was nothing like it at the time. I started a podcast that was the first podcast for female chiropractors. We talked a lot about work-life balance and being a mom and having a business and taking care of all the patients and the clients, and then also somehow finding time to take care of yourself too. And my coaching business has just grown and evolved over the last 8 years since then.
Nice. And I love the fact that you said right before we started recording, that when you asked your kids what you did, that they sort of said, I think therapist. And then when
Yeah.
I first met you, I said, I know you're a doctor because it's in your name, but is it therapy? And you're like, no, wait, I guess it's coaching. But I mean, as a coach, you really are working as a therapist, even though you might not necessarily have a therapy degree.
Yeah. Well, and even just a couple of days ago, my significant other and I were talking to a neighbor outside, and the neighbor said he was going to be having surgery. He's getting a hip replacement, and that when he comes home, he's going to have in-home therapy. And he was like, hey, you could come over and help me with that, right? And I was like, so wait, do people think I do like mental health therapy, or do they think I do physical therapy? Because actually I'm trained in all of it, but it's still confusing.
Right. And in very specific ways from what I understand. So you were telling me before that you know how to do hypnotherapy and somatic release.
Yeah.
And I'm curious what the definition of somatic therapy is, because it's a word that's kind of been thrown around a lot recently, and I'm not sure that I know the exact definition of what that includes.
I don't know if anybody knows the exact definition
Oh,
of somatic
interesting.
therapy, but to me, what it's about is not so much talking. Like we think of traditional therapy or counseling as sitting down in an office with someone or virtually now, and we're just talking about problems and maybe coming up with solutions, or like, why do we feel a certain way? What happened in our past? And healing through talk therapy. But somatic therapy can be a lot of different things. Somatic therapy can be different types of exercise, like physically moving your body, or sometimes the person receiving the somatic therapy doesn't do anything. It's the practitioner that's doing something to their body. I find certain types of massage therapy to actually be somatic healing modalities. My favorite one is myofascial release. And a lot of our emotions are stored in the fascia, like it's like connective tissue in our body.
Mm,
And the myofascial therapist is moving and releasing restriction or tension in the fascia. A lot of emotions come up, and I've
okay.
experienced that even just as recently as a month ago myself, where I was like, oh, oh, I have a lot more healing available here that I wasn't even aware of, because
Right.
I had been having regular massages every month. You know, that's something I prioritize as a chiropractor. I know like about the structure of the body and how important that is. And so I just thought like, okay, I'm just going in for a massage when I saw someone new and she did a different technique than I had experienced for a long time. And then like I've got tears rolling out of my eyes as I'm laying on the table. And I was not expecting that at all. So hopefully that helps kind of answer the question. But yeah, somatic therapies are really more so about moving stored emotions in the body rather than trying to talk our way through things.
And I think that both work hand in hand. I mean, I'm not a therapist. I am also a coach and I work with people in releasing those energies because of the fact that I feel like, especially in trauma, a lot of times it's the emotion and the energy behind the emotion gets trapped. It's something where you keep thinking, I'm going to deal with it later, or I'm going to put it in a box and stick it in my closet, or I'm just going to bury it deep within and it gets bottled up. I mean, we have these phrases for a reason, right? Like this is exactly what's happening inside your body. And so when you can move that emotion and you can also talk about the emotion, it really helps to kind of combine the two and say, okay, sometimes talking about it desensitizes you and that's okay. But sometimes talking about it too much makes it feel like you have no connection to it anymore. And that way you can use that somatic energy and release it and get rid of it.
Yeah. Have you ever read the book, The Body Keeps a Score?
I've heard of it. I haven't read it yet.
It's a lot to take in, I think at least. It's taken me forever to read the book. Not literally forever, but it feels like forever.
Right.
And the book really is focused on healing from PTSD,
Mm,
but I think it applies to a lot of other conditions, if you will. And it explains perfectly what we're talking about right now. So
mm.
if anyone listening, or if you yourself really want to dive deeper into what what is happening or why do we need to utilize somatic therapies, that book is perfect.
Interesting. What's it called again?
The Body Keeps the Score.
The Body Keeps the Score. I know I've heard of it before. I have a friend who is a very big fan of Bradley Nelson, who has the emotion code and the body code, and then
Yeah.
is coming out with the belief code. So I know that she's also told me about that one, but it goes into it like a different idea of how to release things as opposed to what Dr. Bradley Nelson talks about.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome.
So tell me more, I guess, about the types of coaching that you work with in terms of your clients, because I know that there's a wide range of people that really are looking for somebody to help them release these emotions. And it's people with big trauma and little trauma. And do you work with people who have experienced pregnancy loss or loss in general?
Not That's not the thing that brings people to me, but a lot of my clients have experienced pregnancy loss.
Okay.
Yes. So I can give you an example. One of my longtime clients, um, thankfully, her child survived, but she had a very traumatic birth with her first daughter. And there are a lot of ways that her experience with that birth continue to play out in her life now, and even for her child too. I think the child is around 6 or 7, and they were separated right away, right after the baby was born, because the baby wasn't okay, needed medical attention. And then they were separated for a long period of time after that. And so the mother had trauma, the baby had birth trauma, and certain ways that like it plays out now where she might be thinking about making changes in her business or like wanting to grow her business, but she has this near constant sense, or did at least, of like she can't leave her child. And so we've had
Interesting.
to like go further into that. And as a business coach, I do not prioritize the business.
Makes
I
sense.
prioritize my intention is for people to heal first and foremost, and that if their healing yields more revenue in their business, then great, but that they're able to they're able to really be a business owner, but be a business owner in a way that works for their family and their own needs. So for a lot of my clients, that looks like working part-time hours so that they have a lot of space to take care of themselves, to take care of the healing that they might still need to do or weren't even aware that they need to do, and to be present with their children as they're growing up as well. Does that answer your question?
It does. And I had a follow-up question. Now I can't remember what it was. Um, I think the idea behind working with all different types of people is just so fascinating because while we are all so uniquely different, there is so much that is so similar about each of us. And I find it fascinating that somebody who had a birth trauma, that not only the mom is having recurring things happening because of it that you're working through, but the child is also having some issues, which is, it's
Yeah,
an interesting idea. And I think it brings to the mind that we're so connected in so many ways that we don't even realize.
very much. Yes.
So tell me more about, I guess, what your top 5 ways of working through emotions are, because like you just said, this person who did suffer this birth trauma obviously needs to work through other things before they can even begin to look at their career and say, okay, business coaching, now what?
Mhm.
So tell me some steps that you worked through, maybe specifically with her or anybody else, that you just think the 5 top things that people should know in working through emotions and how to get from a place of real grief and loss to something that is much more manageable, where they're not just surviving but thriving.
The first thing that comes to me is having time that's unscheduled. That's what I call white space. And for service-based providers, that can be a lot of different types of people: doulas, midwives, chiropractors, acupuncturists, and lots of other professions outside of the health and wellness space. We are so busy because in order to be successful, and I put that in quotes, people can't see or hear the air quotes. In order to feel successful, at least we think we've got to be as busy as possible with as many clients as possible. And it often leaves us in this place where we're like, we don't have time for ourselves. And that is one of the first things I help people change, because that space that's available is where we start to actually connect to what are we not feeling? What are we ignoring? Sometimes we're so busy because we don't want to feel things, and other times we're too busy to feel anything. Do you see the difference? So it's really just like changing our priorities, changing the way that we're scheduling our life and our work so that there's space where we're not scheduled to do things.
I love
And
that.
sometimes I have clients that really, really struggle with not being busy. And if they have space in their calendar, they find ways to fill it. I literally just had someone yesterday in a group coaching call. She was like, I know that I need time to myself consistently, and I'm really tired from taking care of my kids all summer. And when school starts back up, I need to have more consistent time to myself. So we kind of worked through that. And she identified a block of time that she can have white space consistently. But now the thing for her is to not fill that space up with things that would keep her busy.
Right.
And that's where she's been challenged in the past. So
And what kind of things do you recommend to do in that white space? Because I know people then tend to have this like, okay, well, I'll scroll Instagram. I'm not doing anything, as opposed to saying maybe I should take pen to paper and journal for 20 minutes.
yeah, yeah. Literally sit down. Just sit down. And that's again where it gets really uncomfortable for people. They're like, we don't know how to just be
Right.
a human being, not doing, right? So if that's too uncomfortable, like if it's too uncomfortable to just sit down and do nothing and just some people might call it meditation or whatever, but if you can just literally sit down and take some deep breaths and not have your phone on, not have music playing, not be listening to the TV, just sit down. If that's too uncomfortable, then yes, like pick up a journal or pick up a book that you've been wanting to read and just see what comes through for you.
Mm.
Another tip, I guess, that I give people is okay, I could say like it would be great if you could just give yourself 2 hours to rest this afternoon. And they're looking at me like, how could I
Two
take
hours.
2 hours, right? And instead I microdose that white space with them. So what that means is I help them find the maximum amount of time that they can allow themselves to sit still and do nothing. And I heard someone once, I think it was on a podcast, say 17 seconds is like what to start with. And I was like, 17 seconds, anyone can do anything for 17 seconds, right? So if that's it, if that's what we start with, then that's what we start with.
I
Generally.
remember once where I think I was in fifth grade. I had a teacher who was actually a good friend of mine's mother, and she knew us very well. I'd known this friend since I was like 2.5 years old. So by fifth grade, we're already 10, 11 years old. And she said, I'm gonna see if you guys know how long 2 minutes is. And she took down the clock in the room and she wouldn't let us talk to each other and she wouldn't teach and she wouldn't do anything. And we all had to sit there for 2 minutes. And after you thought the 2 minutes was up, I think you had to raise your hand, if I remember correctly. Or maybe everybody started out with their hands or with their face on their desk. And then when you thought the 2 minutes was up, you sat up straight. And literally, like one after one, we were all incorrect about how long 2 minutes was. It was like somebody thought it was 30 seconds, somebody thought it was 40 seconds, somebody thought it was a minute and 5 seconds. And like the entire class's head was up before 2 minutes because it's so difficult to sit for 2 minutes. So 17 seconds to me sounds a lot more manageable.
Right. Yeah, so we just get to like sit and be present and be still and see what starts to come up, what starts to bubble up to the surface in that time that we're not distracted by all of the other things. And so then like what are the other four things? I guess really it depends on what starts to arise for a person when they're creating some stillness in their lives. For me, this past year, a lot of grief came to the surface when I was sitting still, especially after my kids were out of school on summer break and we had more time. It was quiet in the mornings because they weren't getting up early. They were able to sleep in, and I'd get up and I would just sit down on the couch and be still. And I was like, oh gosh, I'm actually really sad when I just sit still. And the sadness was around the end of my marriage to their father, but also underneath that was a lot of unacknowledged sadness about my own parents not being together, my biological father not being in my life. Oh, so much came up to the surface for me when I just had the space, gave myself the space to sit still and just listen. And so for me, what I did next was I just kept doing more of that. And I wouldn't have been able to say that same thing 5 years ago or even 4 years ago, but it's been a practice for me of like cultivating my tolerance and my resilience and my willingness to to feel uncomfortable emotions. So I suppose that's really what's next, like allowing ourselves to feel the uncomfortable emotions so that we are not continuing to stuff them down or bottle them up and carry them around with us all the time unknowingly. Because even when we're not consciously feeling them, they're still hurting us
They're still
in
there.
in unknown ways. And
Right.
oftentimes they're they're driving our behavior and we don't even know it.
I think part of that also is to actually name them, to give them an identity, to say, oh, this is what grief feels like, or this is what anxiety feels like, or this is what depression feels like, or whatever it might be that you're feeling in that moment. Because a lot of times we're, like you said, we are so busy that we just sort of push it down and block it and not actually understand what the emotion is. And then when you can name it, it all of a sudden has this identity that you can sort of talk to and say, okay, here's what I'm feeling, and this is why. Let's work through that. Let's push it into this realm of saying, okay, this is something I can actually talk about and work through, or breathe through, or do a yoga exercise through, or journal through, or something that can really push it out healthy, in a healthy way, as opposed to just pushing it down and stuffing it away.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would even add to that too. Like sometimes we don't have to try, we don't have to push it. We can just like allow it to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in the allowing of the what we often call negative emotions. When we allow them to be felt, they just sort of start to alchemize themselves.
Mm-hmm. Right. And it's funny because I have a friend who says emotions take 90 seconds to fully go through your system. So we always think of things as positives and negatives, right? So like you just said, there's the negative emotion, so quote unquote, and there's
Yeah.
positive emotions. Well, positive emotions, because they're so positive and they're so easy, take 90 seconds from start to finish. When you're having a really good laugh, when you're really enjoying a conversation, those emotions go through you very quickly. And by the end, you feel like this sigh, almost this like, oh, that felt so good. But a negative emotion, because it feels so bad, tends to get stuck. And that's why I think I use the phrase pushing through it, because it's one of those where, like you said, it doesn't necessarily have to be pushed, it doesn't have to be forced, but when you can feel it, that uncomfortableness almost makes you want to push something and try and release it, as opposed to just, like you said, letting it sort of fizzle out and just be a part of the world.
Yeah. And one of the beautiful things about this is as I increase my capacity for difficult emotions, I find that I'm much more able to support my own children through their difficult emotions as
Right.
well. And instead of what I used to do was yell at my kids, tell them to stop, tell them to be quiet, now I can just, one of my children in particular has really big emotions. I'll just leave it at that for now. But when she's feeling a lot, then I can just sit with her. It doesn't mean that I'm always perfect. Sometimes she's angry. Lately she's done things to herself, like pull her hair when she's angry, or like she starts to kind of pinch at her face. And I'm like, no, no, don't, oh, gosh, don't do that. So it's still like there's still that kind of conditioning in me where I'm like, oh, I want to stop her from doing that thing. But also in some cases, I'm afraid she's going to harm herself,
Right.
so it's a balance, but I'm so much more equipped now to be able to support them in expressing themselves and not doing what was expected of me, at least what I felt was expected of me as a child, which was be quiet, be good, sit down, don't ask for anything.
Right.
End of story.
Right. My kids also, it's funny that you say that. My three are loud and boisterous, and we homeschool, so we, our schedule is always really what is best for us, as opposed to what the world works on. Um and my I have a lot of very close people in my life who maybe don't know how to deal with some of the big emotions that come with that as well. And people always say, God, your patience is so high, and your kids are like screaming around you, and it's, it almost looks like a hurricane has gone off, and you're just sitting calmly at the table. And by all means, I mean, I do yell, I lose my patience, but I think because I have done so much work around
Mm.
releasing these emotions, I their physical emotions don't affect me as much. And so you're right, it is one where whatever they're going through, whether it's excitement or frustration or, anything in between, I'm able to just give it space and let it be what it needs to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And that applies, in so many different aspects of our lives as well. So if you are If you are someone that has a job as an employee and some of your coworkers or maybe your supervisors or boss have some things to say sometimes that might seem, I don't know how would I want to put this, like uncomfortable, just, we'd rather not have them feel that way. When you've really worked through your own stuff, then you're able to identify what's theirs and what's yours.
Right.
And when you know what's yours, then you can see what's coming from them that's actually theirs to go work through, and it's not for you to take on and carry and like resolve for them or
Right.
try to fix for them.
Right.
So this also then gets into the conversation of codependency, because codependency is really, it's like people pleasing and trying to fix other people and needing other people to behave in certain ways so we feel good about ourselves. So you can kind of see how, when we've been doing the work to release our own stored emotions or work through our own things, that we're able to also let other people have their sovereignty and their autonomy and take responsibility for their own parts in their journey. And we know what is ours and where our responsibility actually starts and ends.
Mhm.
And so it's just a healthier way of living life when we're able to let other people be responsible for their own stuff.
Right. 100%. Um, I know that you said the first step really is to just sit with your emotions and sit with yourself. And then depending on what comes up after that, each of those different steps could be something else. But just give us a little bit more in terms of what other maybe activities you could do or what other um, breathing exercises that you really like or things that you just feel would help to then get you to that next step.
Mhm. Yeah, so I think that, you know, some of the things that I generally recommend probably sound obvious, but I'll go through the obvious things and then we'll talk about like when might you need support from another individual. So once you've learned to sit still, once you're practicing sitting still and letting what you're actually feeling come to your awareness, come to the surface, and then identifying it, giving it a name, right? Putting words to those feelings. Then you might go for a walk. You might just like take some deep breaths. There's lots of different forms of breath work. I don't have one in particular that I think is the one. And I think sometimes even just doing whatever feels organic or natural to you in regard to breathing deeper than what you normally do
Mhm.
is going to be beneficial no matter what. Because we're usually not taking in enough oxygen throughout the day. Writing in a journal, reading a book, just, sitting in the bathtub and taking a hot bath, taking a hot shower. If you have access to something like a sauna or a hot tub, just giving yourself some kind of different physical environment to be in. So that might be like moving your body, or it can be putting yourself into a different environment, such as a hot environment, cold environment, in ways that are safe for you. So those kinds of things are going to help literally move energy through your body so that you're moving the emotions as well. There's a book called Burnout. It's written by Amelia and Emily Nagoski. They talk about the stress cycle in regard to overcoming managing burnout. They've identified the stress cycle, and why we get stuck in feeling overwhelmed and exhausted is often because we're not completing the stress cycle. In other words, and how this relates to our conversation right now, is that we're not going all the way through with what has happened to us. So let's say I'll just use a really basic example that a lot of us can relate to. You are on your way to work and there's an accident half a mile ahead, and now there's a huge traffic jam and you're half an hour late for work. And we've all had that experience where we're running behind, our heart rate increases, we start breathing more shallow, our palms are sweaty, we might feel shaky, and we're like, ah! So
That feeling
that
of stress is very familiar.
right? So that's something that we've all felt. And we try to just stop feeling that way instead of allowing ourselves to complete the stress cycle by taking that energy that our body has created and going and doing something physical with it. So that's where going for a walk or picking up the journal or doing some stretching, some yoga, anything that helps you to move that energy helps to complete the stress cycle.
Interesting. So it's like that adrenaline buildup never actually gets the release. And so we're stuck in that fight or flight moment without realizing it.
Yeah, exactly. And we just keep repeating that because we have so many different things that are coming at us all the time.
Right.
You know, if you have one child or if you have 5 children, if you've got one child, you've got one person who might be asking you for, you know, like help in the bathroom, getting snacks, they're throwing a tantrum. They want to go for a walk, but then they're out walking and they want to just sit down and cry. Who knows what, right? And then when you've got 5 children, there's like 5 different personalities now that are all needing something from the parents. That's just kind of one example relates to parenting. But for most of us, we're living in a state where the stressors are coming at us all the time. And so we never really get to fully recover from our last stressor.
Right.
We're late for work. Now our boss is mad. Then the phone is ringing off the hook. We've got 100 emails we haven't replied to. It just kind of like it accumulates and builds up.
Right.
So giving ourselves that time and that space to sit still, identify what we're feeling, give it names, and then go move and get it like literally get the energy moving out of the body.
I love that.
So at some point then we have to ask ourselves, you know, am I doing this or do I need some support from someone else? And I think that's an interesting question, and it's kind of hard to say, you know, here is when you know that you need support from a therapist, whether it's someone that does talk therapy or CBT or someone that does somatic work or something else. I think when it starts to take a toll on your relationships, if it hasn't already, when it's affecting your ability to reach goals in your life, like, and that also takes being really honest with yourself. Like, are you satisfied with what you have created? Do you know that you're capable of more, but you can't figure out how to get out of your own way? Do you dream of something different, but you feel stuck in what you have right now? That's when it's time to look for support.
I love those questions. And I think really getting honest with yourself is important in answering those questions, but also in terms of helping yourself to move forward. Um, so I think that's the perfect place to say, like, okay, if you are looking for help, now how can you get in touch with Dr. Danielle? Because obviously there's a lot that you can offer. And I think that if anybody's listening and they want some help, let them know how they can find you.
Yes, thank you. The best place to connect with me would be on social media. Facebook and Instagram are where I spend most of my social media time. And I love people to just like pop in my inbox and say, hi, let me know how you found me or where you heard about me from. And just kind of hang out with me there and see, you know, like, does what I share resonate with you?
Perfect. And we'll put those handles in the show notes so that people can find them and just click on the link easily. Is there anything else that you wanted to add that we didn't touch on?
Um, you know, we briefly talked before we were recording about death and the grief process. And would you mind if I share my own story? And
No, I would love that.
yeah, awesome, thank you. Because I think that there's so much value in this. I experienced a pregnancy loss in 2013, and long story short, I felt responsible. I felt guilty for the loss of that pregnancy. And to me, it was a loss of a child, right?
Right.
Because I had already envisioned my life with that person, with that
Mhm.
child. And I was making plans for what to change in my business, and I was so excited. And I lost the pregnancy, and then 8 weeks later, I had conceived again.
Wow.
And at that point, I was like, okay, clearly what I'm doing right now is not working. And I don't care what the cost is, I am going to have a healthy baby this time.
Mm.
And that meant, as I had mentioned before, walking away from my practice. So I found out that I was pregnant that second, well, technically it was my third pregnancy. Um, and 6 weeks after that, I handed the keys of my practice over to another chiropractor that I had known since before either of us had gone to chiropractic school. So I had a lot of trust in him, but it still was a tough decision. When you care for patients or clients with your hands, it's such a personal relationship. And so I wanted him to do well and I wanted them to be happy. And I walked away and I didn't know what was next. And it took me quite a lot of time, quite a lot of, I needed a lot of support in the process to forgive myself. Even if everybody else said, this wasn't your fault, I still felt responsible, right? So I needed to be witnessed by people who heard me say, I feel so incredibly guilty. I feel responsible for this. And not say, oh, you don't need to feel that way, but instead acknowledge that I felt that way and just let it be okay. And
It's
that's,
so interesting how your head and your head knows one thing and your heart knows something else. And sometimes that does not agree with each other because 100 million people could tell you it's not your fault. It's and your head knows that, but your
yeah,
heart's going, but then why isn't my baby here? And
yeah.
so like you said, to give that space and to allow that emotion of guilt to be there and to feel present, it's
Mhm.
so difficult. But it and I promise you it's not your fault. But to hear from yourself and to get to that place of understanding is totally different.
Yeah, for sure. And now 10 years later, I can share this story with you or with anyone, and I'm not crying. But 8 years ago, even I couldn't talk about that story, that experience without just sobbing. And it was hard for me to even get the words out because I was just crying so hard even thinking about it.
Right.
So for me to be able to share that story without breaking down emotionally is a sign of healing. And what, as difficult as it was to go through that experience and really painful, it was painful for a long time, emotionally, much more than physically for me. It was so emotionally painful. If you had told me then that it would be the catalyst for where I am now in regard to what I do for work, in my career, who I've become today, I wouldn't have wanted to hear it. But that's really the reality. That experience was a turning point for me that allowed me to, invited me to then grow and change in ways I never even knew were available to me.
Mm.
So I love sharing that because I feel like if you're in that phase where I was like, I didn't want to hear anything other than, yeah, it was my fault. Yes, I was responsible, right? That there is a point in which you will also be able to look back and see how you've changed, you've grown from that experience in so many amazing ways.
Mhm.
And yes, the journey through it is hard and painful and it hurts. And I don't want to say, oh, it's all worth it. It's not that per se, but that there will be a point in time in the future where you can feel at peace with
Mhm.
what you've experienced.
And I think the key thing to remember is that you can't change what happened. Um, no matter if the person was here for weeks or the person was here for a lifetime, it's always painful, and you can't change their determined time to be with us. But what you can change is you moving forward, and like you said, you saying that you can now look back on it 10 years later and understanding that it's still awful. It's still something that I'm sure you wish didn't happen and that your child is here, but at the same time you wouldn't be who you are now without that.
Yep. So I hope that is helpful for people that are listening to hear.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that you feel comfortable sharing it, and I appreciate that not only could you speak on how you can move forward, but personally what that meant for you and how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I can't thank you enough. I really can't. I'm at a loss for words in that respect. I just think that there's so much that we can share with everybody out there, and there's so much healing that can be done. And if we can all really come to this understanding that, like I said at the beginning, there's so much more about us that's in common instead of feeling like we're so uniquely different from each other, whether it's the experiences that we go through or whether it's our shared love of something or just finding something that we can talk about. I think that this world would be a better place if we could all come to the same understanding of that.
Yeah, agreed.
So thank you for sharing everything about your journey and what you have to offer. And for people who are looking to have business help or coaching in general, they should reach out to Danielle because so far, I mean, you've helped me in this half
Mhm.
hour, 45-minute conversation. So it's been
Yeah.
great.
Thank you for creating the space to be able to share these things.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me today on Pushing Through Loss. I hope this episode has provided support, understanding, and a sense of community. Remember, you are not alone on your journey, and you have the strength to face the challenges that come your way. If you found value in today's conversation, please leave me a review and consider sharing it with others who may benefit. Together, we can help each other heal and activate our inner strength warriors. Stay tuned for more empowering conversations, and until next time, you got this.